Before this video disappears into the dark, hit subscribe, tap like, and leave a comment, because what you're about to hear is a story some people would rather you never finish. The first siren cut through San Salvador at 2:17 a.m., sharp and panicked, like the city itself had just realized it was bleeding. By 2:19, there were 6 more. By 2:22, the streets that had belonged to gangs for decades went quiet in a way no one had ever heard before. Not peace, not calm, but something closer to fear holding its breath. On the edge of the Siapango district, beneath a flickering streetlight that hadn't worked properly in years, a body lay sprawled across the pavement. Male, mid-30s, tattoos crawling up his neck like black vines, numbers, letters, symbols that meant nothing to outsiders and everything to the people who mattered. His phone buzzed beside him, vibrating again and again with missed calls that would never be answered. The police didn't rush in like they used to. They arrived methodically. Heavy boots, long rifles, no shouting, no hesitation. Detective Luis Mendez stepped out of the armored truck and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control. He crouched beside the body, careful not to disturb the blood spreading into the cracked asphalt. One glance told him what everyone already knew. This wasn't a random killing. This man had been someone. A courier, a shot caller, a piece on the board. What happened? Mendez asked quietly. A uniformed officer swallowed before answering. No witnesses. No calls from the neighborhood. No one saw anything. Mendez looked up at the surrounding buildings. Windows dark, curtains tight, doors sealed like tombs. That's the strange part, the officer added. Usually they can't wait to talk. Mendez straightened. For 20 years, fear had owned these streets. The gangs had ruled openly, taxing businesses, recruiting children, killing without consequence. Silence had never been part of the equation. Tonight it was everywhere. As forensic lights washed over the body, Mendez noticed something else. The man's right hand was clenched tight. When they pried it open, a scrap of paper fell free. 3 words were scrawled in uneven ink. It's already begun. By sunrise, El Salvador was waking up to headlines that didn't make sense. Raids across multiple districts. Arrests by the hundreds. Military convoys rolling through neighborhoods once considered untouchable. Helicopters hovering so low their downdraft rattled windows and shook loose memories people had tried to forget. And at the center of it all was a man who didn't flinch under the weight of history. President Nayib Bukele stood before the cameras just after 9 a.m., his expression unreadable, his words sharp and deliberate. This country has lived under terror long enough, he said. That ends now. To some, it sounded like salvation. To others, it sounded like a declaration of war. Inside the Ministry of Justice, folders were stacked floor to ceiling. Names, photos, wiretaps, financial records. A map of the country pinned to the wall was riddled with red markers. Each one a gang stronghold, each one now under siege. Mendez stood near the back of the room as analysts briefed senior officials. He wasn't a politician. He wasn't there to clap or cheer. He was there because he knew the gangs, how they thought, how they retaliated, how they survived. And he knew one thing for certain. You don't corner an animal like this without consequences. They're not fighting back, an intelligence officer said, scrolling through live feeds. No organized resistance. No coordinated escapes. Communications have gone dark. Mendez frowned. That's not normal. Nothing about this was. For years, gang leaders had run operations from inside prisons, ordering hits, extorting businesses, moving drugs, all with the complicity of guards who were either paid off or terrified. Locking them up had never stopped anything. But now something had changed. At 11:43 a.m., Mendez received a message on his encrypted phone. Sacot intake confirmed. First transfer underway. The prison didn't officially exist yet. Not on public maps. Not in press releases. Only whispers. A facility designed not to rehabilitate, not to negotiate, but to erase influence. By nightfall, the first convoy arrived. Dozens of buses rolled through reinforced gates, each one carrying men who had once ruled neighborhoods with nothing more than a gesture. They were shaved, stripped, processed, and moved in silence. No calls, no lawyers, no contact. Mendez watched from a raised platform as intake officers worked with chilling efficiency. "These aren't inmates," a guard muttered beside him. "They're ghosts now." But ghosts have memories, and memories have allies. 3 days later, the retaliation everyone feared still hadn't come. No assassinations, no mass shootings, no burned buses. Instead, something more subtle began to surface. A judge's son went missing on his way home from school. A police captain found a note taped to his front door. No threats, just coordinates. A journalist investigating the arrest received a video file with no sender. Mendez was called into the last case personally. The video was shaky, shot on a phone. A man sat in a dark room, his face half hidden. His voice was calm, almost amused. "You think this is over?" the man said. "You think cages and empires?" The video cut to images. Prison blueprints, guard schedules, financial accounts frozen and unfrozen with alarming ease. "This system you're building," the voice continued, "was designed by people who don't understand us." The final frame froze on a single symbol burned into wood. Mendez felt his stomach tighten. "That's old," he said. "That mark hasn't been used in years." "Exactly," the journalist replied, "which means someone very powerful wants you to see it." That night, Mendez drove home through streets that felt unfamiliar. Businesses were open later. Families walked without glancing over their shoulders every 5 seconds. For the first time in his career, he saw kids playing soccer in an alley that used a double as an execution site. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the calm before something vast and violent surfaced from below. At 1:06 a.m., his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "You're asking the wrong questions, detective," a distorted voice said. "This isn't about gangs losing power." The line clicked. A second later, a message came through, an address, a time, and a single sentence. "Come see what your prisons are really holding." The address led him to an abandoned textile factory outside the city, a place shuttered during the Civil War and forgotten by everyone except those who needed to disappear. Mendez arrived just before dawn, backup trailing at a distance. The air inside the building was thick with dust and the smell of rusted machinery. Footprints led toward a locked basement door. New prints, recent, deliberate. "This feels wrong," an officer whispered. Mendez nodded. Every instinct he had was screaming. They forced the door open. The smell hit first, metallic, sharp, unmistakable. Inside, under a single hanging bulb, was a wall covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. Gang members, politicians, judges, police officers. And at the center, pinned with surgical precision, was a high-resolution image of Secot Prison. Marked, mapped, studied. Mendez stared at the wall as the realization settled like ice in his chest. This wasn't a crackdown. It was a challenge, and whoever was behind it had planned for everything, except being seen. Because taped beneath the prison photo was one final message. Phase 1 complete. And that was the moment Detective Luis Mendez understood the truth. They hadn't destroyed the gangs. They had provoked something far worse. By morning, the basement didn't exist anymore. That was the official version. The abandoned textile factory was sealed within hours. Evidence bags disappeared into black vans with no markings. The photographs were classified under a designation Detective Luis Mendez had never seen before, restricted even from most senior law enforcement. When he asked where the files were going, no one answered directly. "They're above our pay grade now," a colonel told him flatly. By noon, news channels were still celebrating mass arrests and plunging homicide numbers. International reporters called a miracle, a model for the West. Headlines praised President Nayib Bukele as the man who had finally broken the gangs. But Mendez couldn't stop seeing the wall. Politicians, judges, police, and that message, Phase 1 complete. If this was Phase 1, what did Phase 2 look like? Inside the Ministry of Justice, a closed-door meeting was already underway. No phones allowed. No recordings. Only a dozen people in the room, and even fewer who truly understood what was happening. A woman named Sophia Calderon stood at the front. She wasn't military. She wasn't police. Her credentials simply read, Strategic Security Advisor. The gangs you arrested, she said, clicking to the next slide, were not the gangs you were fighting. Murmurs rippled through the room. Calderon continued. For years, we treated them like fragmented street organizations. What they actually became was something closer to a shadow corporation. She pulled up a diagram. Arrows flowed between prisons, banks, shell companies, NGOs, and foreign accounts. When you cut off their visible leadership, she said, you didn't destroy the system. You triggered its contingency plan. Mendez leaned forward. The video, the photos, that symbol, who are we dealing with? Calderon hesitated. That alone was unsettling. There's a name, she said finally, but it's never been confirmed in court, never tied to a real identity. She typed one word onto the screen. El Arquitecto, the architect, a figure whispered about in informant circles. A strategist who didn't wear tattoos or colors. Someone who didn't order hits. He designed ecosystems where violence happened automatically. He doesn't care about territory, Calderon said. He cares about leverage. And Sacote? Mendez asked. That prison, she replied quietly, was never meant to hold men. The room went still. 200 kilometers away, inside Sacote prison, time moved differently. No clocks, no mirrors, no names. The inmates were identified only by numbers. Their heads were shaved weekly, their movements synchronized, their voices discouraged to the point of extinction. Guards rotated constantly, never learning the layout well enough to feel comfortable. The design was intentional. Disorientation was the punishment. Yet even here, patterns began to emerge. A guard named Ernesto noticed it first. Tiny things. Prisoners who never looked up, but always seemed to know when inspections were coming. Men who positioned themselves strategically in formation without speaking. One night, during a routine count, Ernesto saw an inmate subtly trace a shape on the concrete floor with his toe. A square, then a line, then another square. Ernesto froze. He'd seen that symbol before, years ago, in a police briefing that had ended abruptly and never been mentioned again. The architect's mark. Ernesto reported it. 2 days later, he was reassigned. 3 days after that, he stopped answering his phone. Back in San Salvador, the retaliation finally began, but not the way anyone expected. No shootouts, no bombs, just collapses. A major witness in an ongoing corruption case recanted his testimony overnight, claiming coercion. A financial audit into seized gang assets found irregularities and was quietly suspended. A judge who had signed dozens of emergency detention orders abruptly took medical leave and fled the country. Each incident, on its own, was explainable. Together, they formed a pattern. Mendez tracked them on his office wall, red string connecting names and dates. The picture was ugly. They're bleeding us legally, he muttered. Calderon stood beside him. Power doesn't always fight back with bullets. Then what's their end game? She looked at the map. To make the crackdown unsustainable. To turn international opinion. To force negotiations. And if that doesn't work? She didn't answer. The first body was found in a river. Male, early 40s. No tattoos. Clean clothes. A banker. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. But there were no visible wounds. The autopsy later showed heart failure, induced by stress and chemical restraint. What made Mendez's blood run cold was the item found in his pocket. A prison ID card. Not his. Someone else's number. Inside Sacote. The message was clear. We can reach out. And we can reach in. Within 48 hours, 2 more bodies surfaced. A logistics contractor. A former gang mediator turned community consultant. None of them were active criminals. All of them had one thing in common. They knew how the system worked. Pressure mounted fast. Human rights organizations began demanding transparency. Foreign governments requested prison access. Social media filled with before and after images. Safe streets contrasted with mass incarceration footage. The narrative was shifting. Mendez found himself pulled into meetings he didn't trust. Questions weren't about stopping crime anymore. They were about optics. How long could we legally hold them? One official asked. What happens if the courts intervene? Another said. No one asked what happened if the gangs adapted faster than the government. Late one evening, Mendez returned to his apartment to find the door unlocked. Nothing was missing. Nothing was disturbed, except one thing. On his kitchen table sat a folder. Inside were photographs of him entering the ministry, meeting Calderon, standing over the wall of faces in the basement. The last photo showed his apartment building from across the street, time-stamped, taken that morning. At the bottom of the folder was a note. You're chasing the cage. We built the key. Mendez didn't sleep that night. Instead, he drove. The address he chose wasn't on any official list. It belonged to a retired intelligence officer named Raul Ibarra, one of the few men who had fought gangs before they were called gangs. Ibarra opened the door slowly, eyes narrowing when he saw Mendez. I wonder how long it would take, the old man said. You know about him, Mendez replied. Ibarra nodded once. We all did. We just never caught him. They sat in a dim living room cluttered with old case files and fading photographs. The mistake, Ibarra said, was thinking this was about control through fear. That was the old model. El Arquitecto figured out something better. What? Dependency, Ibarra said. He made institutions rely on the gangs to function: money laundering, vote coercion, informal justice. When you remove the gangs, you expose how rotten everything else was. Mendez felt the weight of it settle in. So the prisons are bait, Ibarra finished. And the people inside them? Disposable. A sudden knock cut through the room. Sharp, deliberate. Ibarra's eyes widened. That's not the police, he whispered. The lights went out. In the darkness, a phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. Mendez answered. A familiar, distorted voice spoke softly. You finally stopped looking at the walls, it said. Now you're ready to see the foundation. The line went dead. The knock came again, this time from inside the house. And as Mendez reached for his weapon, he realized the most terrifying truth yet. Secote wasn't the end of the gangs. It was the beginning of their next evolution. The lights came back on 3 seconds later. That was all it took. 3 seconds. Long enough for someone to move, long enough for a decision to be made, long enough for the future of the case to shift in a direction no one could undo. When the lamps flickered to life, Raul Ibarra was on the floor, alive, but barely. His coffee table had been overturned, files scattered like fallen leaves. A single window at the back of the house stood open, curtains swaying gently in the night breeze. No intruders were found. No neighbor saw anything. No cameras caught a face. Just a message left behind, etched into the wood of the doorframe with surgical precision. Foundations don't collapse. They get replaced. By dawn, the situation had escalated beyond law enforcement. Military intelligence took over the case. Mendez was informed, not asked, that he was being reassigned. His access revoked. His badge scheduled for return. You're too close, a senior official told him. This is bigger than one detective. Mendez didn't argue. He knew what that meant. When cases got bigger, they didn't get solved. They got buried. But before he could be escorted out of the building, Sofia Calderon intercepted him in the hallway. Her expression was tight, controlled, but her eyes betrayed urgency. They're accelerating, she said under her breath. We intercepted internal chatter. Not gang chatter, government. She handed him a flash drive. What's on it? Proof, she said. Or a death sentence. Depends who sees it. Mendez hesitated. Why trust me? Calderon met his gaze. Because you still think this ends with arrests. She walked away before he could respond. The flash drive unlocked a reality far darker than Mendez expected. It wasn't evidence of gang crimes. It was evidence of deals, back-channel negotiations, financial carve-outs, quiet guarantees made international partners terrified of instability, internal memos acknowledging that total eradication of the gangs was never the plan. The goal was containment. Sakote wasn't designed to destroy gang leadership. It was designed to warehouse it, neutralize the street violence, restore public order, buy political capital, and behind closed doors, allow the real power structure, the financiers, the strategists, the untouchables to adapt. El Arquitecto wasn't fighting the state. He had become part of it. Mendez felt sick. The prison that symbolized victory to the public was, in truth, a pressure valve, a way to convince citizens they were safe while the machinery of corruption quietly rewired itself. Then he found the final file, a classified psychological assessment. Subject, unknown El Arquitecto. Conclusion, subject demonstrates no attachment to individuals or organizations. Views human structures as temporary scaffolding. Likely objective is not survival, but permanence through systems. At the bottom of the document was a recommendation. Do not attempt capture. Removal would create instability. Mendez leaned back in his chair, the weight of it crushing him. They weren't losing control. They were choosing not to win. That afternoon, President Bukele addressed the nation again. Crime statistics had plummeted. Murders were down by numbers no one thought possible. Streets once ruled by fear were filled with tourists. Cameras flashing, headlines glowing. This is what courage looks like, the president said. This is what happens when a nation decides not to negotiate with terror. The applause was thunderous. Mendez watched from a darkened room, the flash drive heavy in his pocket. For a moment, he understood the temptation. Peace, even if imperfect, was addictive. The final confrontation didn't happen in an alley or a courtroom. It happened in a server room, deep beneath a government complex. Humming with quiet power, Mendez found the node Calderon had pointed him toward. Financial routing systems, prison logistics, data pipelines connecting law enforcement, private contractors, and international banks. This was the foundation. He wasn't alone. A man stepped out from between the server racks. No tattoos, no uniform, just a tailored suit and calm eyes. You're disappointed, the man said. His voice was familiar now. Undistorted, human. That's natural. El Arquitecto, Mendez said. The man smiled faintly. A label? I prefer custodian. You let thousands die, Mendez snapped. You built this on blood. I built it on reality, the man replied. You think the world runs on laws? It runs on incentives. I simply align them. Mendez raised his weapon. This ends tonight. The man didn't flinch. No, tonight decides whether the illusion survives. He gestured to the servers. Shut this down and the violence comes back. Markets panic. Sanctions follow. The prisons open under international pressure. The gangs return angrier, smarter. He stepped closer. Leave it running, and your country remains safe. Quiet, predictable. Mendez's finger trembled on the trigger. You're asking me to be complicit. I'm offering you relevance, the man said softly. History doesn't remember who was right. It remembers what worked. Footsteps echoed in the distance. Security was coming. The man leaned in one last time. You already lost a moment people decided safety mattered more than truth. Then he vanished through a secure door that locked behind him forever. Mendez made his choice. He didn't shut the system down. He copied it, everything, and then he walked away. Weeks later, the world celebrated El Salvador as a miracle. Crime documentaries called it unprecedented. Politicians from across the globe toured the prisons. Social media flooded with praise, arguments, absolutes. The story was clean. Too clean. Mendez resigned quietly. Calderon disappeared from public records. Raul Ibarra died in his sleep, his past officially forgotten. And somewhere deep inside Sakote prison, inmates continued their silent routines. Numbers instead of names, movements instead of voices. The gangs were gone, but the system they built was stronger than ever. 3 months later, a body was found in a river. No tattoos, clean clothes, a government consultant. In his pocket was a prison ID card, a new number, and scrawled on the back, in careful handwriting, were 4 words that never made the news. Phase 2 is stable. They said the gangs were destroyed. But if you listen closely, beneath the silence, beneath the statistics, you can still hear the machinery turning. And if this story kept you watching until the end, just remember, the next one is already being built.